Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. For those of you who are new here, we dive deep into the true crime stories that reveal the shocking truths hidden beneath the surface of our world. If you're ready for a story that is as heartbreaking as it is enervating, then you're in the right place. Make sure you're subscribed and have notifications on, because what you're about to hear is something you won't forget. The insistent, piercing ring of a telephone shattered the pre-dawn calm in a small apartment in Lviv, Ukraine. In the bluish light of the emerging morning, Maria Kovalchuk fumbled for her mobile on the nightstand, her heart already hammering against her ribs before her eyes even focused on the screen. A cold, familiar dread washed over her. It had been 3 long, torturous days since she'd last heard from her daughter, Maria. 3 days of silence from her beautiful, ambitious 20-year-old, who had traveled to the gleaming metropolis of Dubai, chasing the twin sirens of modeling fame and social media stardom. Still no word from Maria. Anna whispered into the stillness of the room, her thumb scrolling through a string of unanswered messages, each one a tiny monument to her growing terror. The familiar profile picture, Maria with flawless makeup, carefully posed in designer clothes, a confident smile plastered on her face, stared back at her from the screen. It was no longer a symbol of her daughter's success. It had become an ominous reminder of a carefully curated online persona that had swallowed the real girl whole. 20-year-old Maria Kovalchuk had, by sheer force of will and digital savvy, built a substantial and loyal following on platforms like OnlyFans and Instagram. She had masterfully transformed herself from a small-town Ukrainian girl into Mary Lou, an international model and influencer. Her glamorous posts were a meticulously crafted portfolio of a seemingly charmed life, sun-drenched photos from luxury hotel infinity pools, videos of champagne brunches with laughing friends, snapshots from exclusive parties where the air seemed to shimmer with money and possibility. It was the ultimate influencer success story, a modern-day fairy tale. Until the page went blank. Maria had vanished without a trace. She had arrived in Dubai in early March 2025, just another stop on what was supposed to be her global modeling tour, another chapter in her ascent. The city, a dazzling mirage of glass and steel rising defiantly from the desert, had become a powerful magnet for beautiful young women from Eastern Europe and Russia, all of them seeking fame and fortune in what was billed as the ultimate playground for the ultra-wealthy. The last thread of communication was a text message, sent on the evening of March 10th. "Mom, I'm staying in a fancy hotel," Maria had written, the words tinged with excitement. "There is a cool party tonight. I'm going to talk to some interesting people. They say they have connections. They can help me get ahead." The message was punctuated with a string of emojis, a champagne bottle, a star, a flexing bicep. It was a message full of hope and ambition. It was the last message Maria Kovalchuk would ever receive from her daughter. The invitation to that fateful party had not materialized out of thin air. It had been carefully delivered through a network of intermediaries, men who had expertly positioned themselves as crucial connectors to Dubai's most elite and impenetrable social circles. One such man, whom we will refer to as Michael Smith, played a particularly instrumental role. He was an enterprising European expatriate who had spent the last 5 years building a web of contacts and a lucrative business in the heart of Dubai. Michael had carved out a very specific, very profitable niche for himself. He specialized in introducing fresh-faced, ambitious young models from Europe and the Commonwealth of Independent States to a clientele of wealthy, often powerful, men. His stock in trade was promises. He dealt in visions of fashion shows strutted in designer labels, of modeling contracts with prestigious agencies, and most enticingly, of access to legendary VIP parties where, he claimed, careers could be launched into the stratosphere overnight with a single handshake. Another shadowy figure who moved effortlessly through these same glittering, treacherous circles was a man we'll call Adam Collins. Also a European immigrant who had planted roots in Dubai years prior, Adam had established himself firmly within the city's high-end hospitality sector. His expertise was access. Whether through a chain of trendy restaurants or by providing discreet personal services to visiting dignitaries, Adam had the connections. He possessed the coveted knowledge of which unmarked elevator buttons would whisk you up to the private, VIP-only floors of Dubai's most exclusive and opulent hotels. These were floors that required special key cards, floors where the standard rules of society didn't seem to apply, and where the regular hotel security was replaced by private, steely-eyed guards who answered to a different, more secretive authority. What Maria, in her excitement and ambition, could never have possibly known was that her name had been quietly added to a very different kind of list. Across the city, in a sterile, brightly lit police station, Dubai Police Captain Khaled Al-Masri reviewed the newly filed missing person report with a sense of weary, practiced efficiency. Another one, he thought to himself. Another young Eastern European model gone missing. It was the third such case this year alone. The details were frustratingly, depressingly familiar. Young woman, traveling alone, last seen accepting an invitation from unidentified men. The mother is frantic, claims it's been 72 hours with no contact. His assistant noted, his voice neutral. The Ukrainian consulate is already involved, putting on pressure. Captain Khaled simply nodded, his expression grim, as he added Maria's thin file to the growing stack on his desk. What he could not bring himself to tell the frantic mother, thousands of miles away, was that Dubai had, in certain hushed international law enforcement circles, developed a notorious reputation for a specific, insidious type of trafficking. A trade that targeted precisely the kind of young, hopeful women who flocked to the city's glittering shores, sold a dream that too often curdled into a nightmare. Check the usual locations, he instructed his team, his voice betraying a hint of resignation. And get me the surveillance footage from her hotel lobby and the corridors leading to her room. But even as he gave the order, Khaled knew the trail would likely be cold. The men who operated in this shadowy world were professionals, well practiced in the dark art of making young women disappear without a trace. And when those targets were being delivered to individuals possessing immense wealth and unassailable influence, even the most diligent investigations had a habit of hitting invisible, immovable walls. 6,000 kilometers away, in the comforting familiarity of her Lviv kitchen, Maria Kovalchuk was transforming her home into a makeshift command center. Her laptop sat perpetually open, its screen a mosaic of open tabs, news sites, flight trackers, social media profiles. Her phone was constantly charging, a lifeline to a world that seemed to be offering her no answers. She coordinated a desperate, patchwork effort with Ukrainian diplomatic officials, with the often silent Dubai police, and with Maria's scattered friends across the globe. She was supposed to fly to Thailand after Dubai, Anna explained to the Ukrainian consul, Natalia Zhukova. Her voice raw and frayed from days of crying and making endless, pleading phone calls. When she didn't board that flight, I knew in my soul that something was terribly, terribly wrong. Maria is responsible. She is meticulous. She never misses flights. Consul Zhukova, a woman with a kind but weary demeanor, had handled similar cases before. Far too many similar cases. We are working closely with the local authorities here, she assured Anna, her tone carefully measured, not mentioning the profound difficulties of navigating Dubai's complex and often opaque legal system, or the deep-seated reluctance of certain officials to acknowledge the disturbing patterns that were emerging in these disappearances. What neither woman could have possibly anticipated was that Maria's case would eventually become the thread that, when pulled, would begin to unravel a vast and sinister shadow industry operating with brazen confidence just beneath Dubai's gleaming, polished facade. An industry that involved not just small-time party promoters and unscrupulous modeling scouts, but men who referred to themselves with imposing titles like Sheikh or even Crown Prince. On the 7th day of Maria's disappearance, a Russian model named Angelina Dorsa was scrolling through her phone in her quiet Moscow apartment when a news alert lit up the screen. The alert was about her friend Maria. Angelina's blood ran cold. She had been invited to the very same party but had, at the last moment, listened to a nagging feeling in her gut and declined, choosing instead to fly back home to Russia. Now, reading the breaking news report, her hands began to shake uncontrollably. "I could have been there," she whispered to the four silent walls of her apartment. "That could have been me." Angelina had heard the whispers, the dark rumors that snaked through the modeling community about the other, hidden side of Dubai's glamorous scene. The whispers spoke of private yacht parties that drifted into international waters, of desert excursions, with wealthy businessmen where the vast, empty sands swallowed all sound, and most notoriously, of the events known among industry insiders by a vile and degrading name: porter potty parties. The rumors described scenarios of extreme and calculated humiliation, where young women were pressured to endure unthinkable acts for staggering sums of money. But even more disturbing than these stories were the persistent rumors about certain sheikhs, men who presented themselves as royalty, or at least as powerful members of Dubai's ruling elite. These men, it was said, weren't just looking for fleeting party companions, some were seeking potential wives. European brides who would enter into what amounted to a life of elegant, gilded captivity. Investigative journalists would later discover that some of these men were actually just wealthy business owners with no genuine royal connections at all, merely borrowing the prestige and intimidating power of a title to lure vulnerable young women into their orbit. Most models, including Maria, dismissed these stories as sensationalist urban legends or the bitter gossip of jealous rivals. But Angelina had once received a similar, vaguely worded invitation from men with slicked back hair, perfect smiles that didn't reach their eyes, and connections that seemed just a little too vague. Something had felt intrinsically wrong, a primal instinct for self-preservation that had made her decline the very party Maria had so excitedly attended. Without a second thought, she reached for her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed the number for the Ukrainian authorities, determined to tell them everything she knew. 10 days after Maria Kovalchuk vanished from her Dubai hotel, at 3:17 in the morning, the emergency services switchboard in the city received a call from a panicked truck driver on a deserted road on the city's desolate outskirts. "There's a woman on the side of the road," the Pakistani driver reported in broken, heavily accented English, his voice tight with fear. "She's not moving much. I think she needs help. Please hurry." The paramedics arrived on the scene within minutes, their headlights cutting through the oppressive desert darkness to illuminate a scene that would haunt their nightmares for years to come. A young woman lay crumpled and broken on the gravelly shoulder, her body bearing the brutal, unmistakable evidence of extreme and sustained trauma. She had multiple broken limbs, a shattered spine, and severe lacerations and bruising that covered her pale skin, a grim tapestry that suggested not a single accident, but days of systematic abuse. Her face was a swollen, bloody mess, barely recognizable as human through the caked blood and grotesque swelling. But as the paramedics carefully began their work, one of them noticed a small, intricate detail on her wrist. A delicate, professionally inked compass rose. It was a small beacon of identity on a body that had been stripped of everything else. It would later be the key to identifying her as Maria Kovalchuk. Female, Caucasian, early 20s, multiple traumatic injuries, the lead paramedic reported over the crackling radio as they worked swiftly to stabilize her and rush her to Rashid Hospital. No identification, no personal belongings found at the scene. Condition is critical. One investigator, upon reviewing the case details later, would coldly suggest that she had likely been thrown from a moving vehicle, a final, callous attempt by those responsible to cover their tracks and ensure her silence. The specific pattern and nature of her injuries were medically inconsistent with a simple fall or a traffic accident. This was something else entirely. This was the signature of pure, unadulterated hatred and violence. As a team of the city's best doctors fought a desperate, grueling battle in the operating theater to stabilize their mysterious, broken patient, the Dubai police began the slow, meticulous process of trying to identify the young woman who had been discarded like a piece of trash on a lonely road. The call that Anna Kovalchuk had been desperately awaiting, praying for, finally came, but it brought with it no sense of relief, only a new, more profound layer of horror. "We have found your daughter," the Ukrainian consul said, her voice carefully controlled and measured, each word chosen with precision. "She is alive, but her condition is extremely serious. You need to come to Dubai immediately." Within hours, Anna was on a flight, clutching a hastily packed bag and the last happy photo she had of Maria, taken the previous Christmas, before her daughter had embarked on her international modeling career, her eyes full of bright, untarnished dreams. The 14-hour journey was a disorienting blur of frantic prayers and the most terrifying, worst-case scenarios playing on an endless, torturous loop in her mind. When she finally, after an eternity in the air and a frantic cab ride, reached Maria's hospital room, the clinical reality was more devastating than anything her imagination could have conjured. Her vibrant, beautiful daughter lay motionless in the stark white bed, unconscious and connected to a bewildering maze of tubes, wires, and beeping monitors. Her body was so brutally broken, so swollen and alien, that it barely resembled the vibrant, laughing girl who had left Ukraine just weeks before with a heart full of stardust and ambition. "She has already undergone 4 separate emergency surgeries," one of the doctors explained to Anna in a gentle, hushed tone, pulling her aside. "Her spine was fractured in 3 separate places. She has multiple broken bones, significant internal bleeding, and extensive soft tissue damage. But I must tell you, she is a fighter. She is clinging to life with incredible strength." What the doctor did not say, what he could not say with any degree of certainty, was the terrifying prognosis that loomed over everything: whether Maria would ever walk again, whether she would ever be able to speak coherently, whether her memory would remain intact, or if she would ever truly recover from the profound psychological trauma that had undoubtedly accompanied the physical devastation. As Maria continued her fragile fight for life in the sterile confines of the ICU, the Dubai authorities moved quickly to control the narrative. They released an official, tersely worded statement to the press. It confirmed that the Ukrainian citizen previously reported missing was currently hospitalized and receiving medical care, with her family present. Then came the crucial, and highly controversial, conclusion. "A comprehensive investigation has revealed that she sustained serious injuries after entering a restricted construction site alone and falling from a significant height." The statement concluded with a standard warning against sharing unverified information and a polite but firm request to respect the family's privacy during this difficult time. When Anna was given a copy of the police report and read the dry, bureaucratic language, her initial, soul-crushing grief transformed in an instant into a pure, incandescent rage. "A construction site?" she nearly shouted at Consul Jukava, her voice trembling with a mixture of fury and disbelief. "My daughter would never, ever wander into a dangerous, restricted construction site alone in the middle of the night. She was terrified of heights. And where are her phone and her passport? Why was she found with absolutely nothing?" The consul, Natalia Jukava, shared Anna's deep suspicions but counseled strategic caution. "The authorities here are extremely sensitive about their international reputation," she explained quietly, leaning closer. If we want to secure their continued cooperation in this investigation, and in getting Maria the best possible care, we need to be very, very strategic in how we proceed. We cannot publicly accuse them of a cover-up. Not yet. But while Anna was being advised to tread carefully, the Ukrainian authorities back in Lviv were already pursuing a radically different theory. The National Police of Ukraine had independently opened their own investigation, and their focus was not on a tragic accident, but on a sophisticated case of international human trafficking. A renowned international lawyer named David DeFiore, who had spent 30 years navigating the complex, murky waters of cross-border criminal cases, reviewed Maria's case file from his office in Dubai, the city's glittering, indifferent skyline spread out like a jeweled carpet beyond his window. He recognized the patterns immediately. They were as familiar to him as the back of his own hand. The fact that all her personal documentation is missing is highly significant, he explained to the Ukrainian officials who had urgently consulted him. In trafficking cases, that is always the very first thing they take: passports, phones, wallets, anything that gives the victim a sense of independence, identity, or a means to call for help. It's how they establish total control. The location where Maria was found also raised massive red flags for DeFiore. Organized traffickers do not typically drop their victims off at hospital emergency rooms, he noted dryly. They discard them when they have served their purpose, or when they become a liability. This has all the hallmarks of a disposal. What troubled the seasoned lawyer most, however, was the almost unbelievable speed and finality with which the Dubai authorities had concluded their investigation. A simple fall from a height does not, in any medical textbook, explain this specific, complex pattern of injuries, he stated firmly, reviewing the graphic medical reports with a critical eye. These injuries, according to every independent specialist I have consulted, are medically consistent with prolonged, systematic abuse, not a single, catastrophic impact. But he knew that publicly challenging the official narrative would require hard, irrefutable evidence. And that evidence, he suspected, was already being systematically erased, altered, or buried under a mountain of bureaucratic obfuscation as they spoke. The truth about what truly happened to Maria during those 10 missing days was painstakingly pieced together from fragments of evidence, like assembling a shattered vase. Security footage, recovered from a camera across the street from the hotel, showed Maria and several other young models entering the glittering lobby of a luxury hotel, accompanied by a group of men who spoke a mixture of English and Arabic. The models looked excited, dressed to impress. The men looked confident, proprietary. Whispered, anonymized witness statements were eventually coaxed from terrified hotel staff. They spoke of hearing disturbing noises, shouts, thuds, a woman's scream, coming from the secured VIP floor that night. They reported being explicitly instructed by a manager not to disturb the VIP guests under any circumstances. Their concerns brushed aside, and most importantly, there was Maria's own harrowing, fragmented testimony, recorded over several sessions when she finally regained a fragile hold on consciousness and could whisper a few broken sentences. The party, it turned out, had not taken place in a public club or a restaurant, but on a secured, access-controlled VIP floor of one of Dubai's most exclusive and iconic skyscrapers. Access required special electronic keycards, and the regular hotel security had been entirely replaced by a team of private, unsmiling guards. Men who answered not to the hotel management, but directly to the mysterious, powerful Sheikh, who had taken a particular and sinister interest in Maria. What had begun as an evening of champagne and seemingly sophisticated conversation had rapidly devolved into something much darker, much more predatory. When Maria, her instincts finally screaming at her, had attempted to leave, she had discovered the exits were electronically locked from the inside. Her phone was calmly but firmly confiscated by one of the guards. The other girls who had arrived with her faced similar restrictions. their protests muted by fear, though some of them appeared chillingly accustomed to the arrangement, a fact which suggested to investigators that this was far from the first such event. According to Maria's fractured, trauma-scarred recollections, a ritual of sorts had then taken place. The Sheikh, a man perhaps 10 to 15 years her senior, who confidently claimed direct connections to Dubai's ruling family, had subjected her to escalating levels of psychological and physical humiliation when she repeatedly, firmly refused his sexual advances. When she had attempted to physically resist, to fight back, the real, unvarnished violence began in earnest. It was a storm of fists and feet, a release of pure, predatory hatred. The morning after the party, cleaning staff hired by the hotel found signs of chaos and struggle in several of the palatial suites on the VIP floor. There were scattered women's accessories, a broken high heel, overturned furniture, and ominous, dark stains on an expensive rug. But the guests themselves were gone, vanished into the early morning haze. The men had departed in a convoy of blacked-out SUVs, and the women, including Maria, had simply been erased from the scene. Maria was not the only victim of that night. According to unverified but persistent reports from other models, another young woman, whom we'll call Jessica Evans, also vanished after attending the same party. Unlike Maria, Jessica was never found. There was no body, no hospital admission, no trace. Simply a social media account that went permanently dark and a family, somewhere in the world, left with nothing but unanswered, agonizing questions. In the months that followed, Maria Kovalchuk's story erupted into an international scandal and a media firestorm. Outlets from the BBC to the New York Post ran extensive, lurid coverage of the mysterious case of the Ukrainian model found brutally beaten but miraculously alive in Dubai. Speculation ran rampant across social media platforms, with the terms porta-potty parties and Dubai trafficking rings trending for days, exposing a dark underbelly of the influencer world that many had suspected, but few had proven. A prominent Russian lawyer named Katya Gordon, who specialized in helping models in distress, issued stark, public warnings to young women across Eastern Europe. Girls, women, and their mothers, listen to me, she pleaded in a televised interview that was widely shared online. Do not go to such events, no matter how much money they promise you. The risks are unimaginable. You could be seriously injured. You could even get killed. Rhoda Sterling, the founder of the advocacy group detained in Dubai, publicly confirmed that Maria's tragic case was, sadly, not an isolated incident. Our organization has received a number of credible complaints from influencers, models, and artists who have been invited to Dubai for performances and events, only to be lured into private parties where they have been pressured, coerced, or forced to participate in sexual activities against their will, he stated. There is a clear and disturbing pattern here. As international pressure mounted from governments, human rights organizations, and a horrified public, both Ukrainian and international law enforcement agencies significantly increased their scrutiny of Dubai's modeling industry and the shadowy, powerful networks operating with seeming impunity within it. The investigation, however, faced unique and formidable challenges within Dubai's particular legal and social environment. When high-profile cases involving the elite emerged, mechanisms of containment and damage control often engaged automatically, working to smother scandal rather than expose the raw, ugly truth. The hotel where the party had taken place eventually provided some surveillance footage, but the crucial hours from the night of the event were mysteriously corrupted or missing. The electronic elevator logs for the VIP floor had been altered or entirely deleted. The private guards who had been stationed on the floor that night, men employed directly by the Sheikh rather than the hotel, were nowhere to be found. They had vanished as completely and utterly as Jessica Evans had. Michael Smith, the European expatriate who had allegedly introduced Maria to these deadly circles, was reportedly spotted on a security camera at a major European airport a week after the incident, and was never seen in Dubai again. Adam Collins, the other key middleman, suddenly and without explanation shuttered all of his Dubai-based businesses, which subsequent investigations revealed were all registered in a Byzantine web of offshore locations, placing them far beyond the easy reach of international law. Most frustrating of all for investigators, the Sheikh himself proved to be a phantom. Basic questions about his actual status and identity produced a cascade of conflicting answers. Some sources, including former business associates, claimed he was genuinely connected to an influential and powerful local family. Others suggested he was merely a wildly wealthy impostor with legitimate business interests who simply used the intimidating mystique of royal connections to manipulate and control young women. Whatever his true identity, his political and financial connections were substantial enough to keep him permanently beyond the immediate reach of the investigation. While several low-level members of his entourage were eventually, after immense diplomatic pressure, charged in Dubai courts for various offenses including violence, illegal imprisonment, and causing serious bodily harm, the central figure, the architect of the horror, remained utterly untouchable. Political leverage, attempted bribery of officials, and even whispered threats of blackmail further complicated and slowed the case to a crawl. The investigation technically proceeded, but with a peculiar and frustrating opacity that left the public and Maria's family with far more questions than answers. 6 long months after being found discarded on that deserted road, Maria Kovalchuk was finally medically stable enough to be transferred to a specialized neurological rehabilitation center in her hometown of Kiev. She had survived against all conceivable odds, enduring 7 complex surgeries and months of intensive, painful therapy simply to regain the most basic motor functions. She could now speak in short, complete sentences, though her memory of the traumatic events remained a fractured, terrifying mosaic of flashbacks and nightmares. Whether this amnesia was due to the severe physical trauma to her head, or a profound psychological mechanism of self-protection, her team of doctors couldn't say for certain. Anna had transformed herself into her daughter's most fierce and unrelenting advocate, skillfully leveraging the relentless media attention to push for a thorough, transparent international investigation. The case had sparked genuine diplomatic tensions between Ukraine and the UAE, with senior Ukrainian officials openly, publicly rejecting Dubai's official accident explanation. "What happened to my daughter was no accident," Anna told a packed room of journalists at a press conference in Kiev, her voice steady and strong, her eyes blazing with a mother's righteous fury. "It was a premeditated crime, a violent assault. And it is a crime that has been happening to other young women in Dubai for years, while the authorities there have consistently looked the other way." Her powerful, public advocacy had already produced tangible, real-world results, creating a ripple effect of accountability. 3 modeling agencies, all based in Eastern Europe but with direct links to the traffickers in Dubai, were shut down by international law enforcement cooperation, their assets seized and their owners arrested. Several European governments, including those of Germany, France, and the UK, issued updated, specific travel advisories for young women traveling to Dubai for work in the modeling and influencer industries, explicitly warning of the dangers of unscrupulous scouts and fake parties, and most significantly, a coordinated international police operation led to the arrest of 6 men across 3 different countries, all of them key players in a sophisticated international trafficking network operating across Eastern Europe, Russia, and the Gulf states. Though Maria's once so promising modeling career was now, for the foreseeable future, in serious doubt due to the permanence of some of her injuries, her personal story had taken on a much greater, more profound significance. She had become a reluctant symbol, a living, breathing warning of the deadly dangers lurking behind the glamorous, seductive facade of the international modeling and influencer industry. Dangers that far too many young, ambitious women were still willing to ignore for the seductive promise of fame and fortune. 1 year after Maria's terrifying disappearance, the legal and regulatory landscape in Dubai had shifted, subtly but significantly. The city's authorities, while still publicly unwilling to acknowledge the full, horrifying scope of the problem, were unable to ignore the relentless international pressure and damning media coverage. They had quietly implemented a series of new, stricter regulations for modeling agencies and party promoters operating within the emirate. Background checks for those obtaining modeling visas became more stringent. Reporting requirements for events involving foreign nationals became more robust. The Sheikh himself, the man at the center of the storm, had apparently left the UAE entirely, his luxurious properties sold off, his complex business interests transferred to a new, opaque network of holding companies. Though he had never been formally charged or even publicly named, the identity he had used in Dubai's social circles had become toxic, a name whispered with disgust. Rumors, impossible to verify, placed him in various global havens for the ultra-rich: Singapore, Monaco, London. Wherever he was, he had shed his crown prince persona like a used skin, disappearing back into the shadows from which he came. For Maria, back in Kiev, the physical recovery continued at an agonizingly, frustratingly slow pace. Though her initial team of doctors in Dubai had privately feared she might never walk again, through sheer, dogged determination and countless hours of painful therapy, she had progressed to moving short distances with the assistance of a walker. The psychological healing, however, proved to be an even more challenging and complex battle. Crippling nightmares, debilitating flashbacks, and a profound, ingrained distrust of strangers now cast a long shadow over her once outgoing, effervescent personality. "Do you think they'll ever be caught, Mama?" Maria asked her mother one quiet evening, as they sat together in their modest Kiev apartment, the lights of the city twinkling outside the window. "The men who did this to me." Anna reached out and squeezed her daughter's hand, her own heart aching with a love so fierce it was a physical pain. "I don't know, my love," she replied softly, her voice thick with emotion. "But I promise you this, the world knows your story now. Because of your incredible bravery in speaking out, other girls are being more careful. Because of you, these evil men are finding it harder and harder to operate. Your voice has become a shield for others." What Anna did not tell her daughter in that moment, wanting to protect her from further anguish, was that international investigators working on her case had since identified and were actively looking into at least 12 other chillingly similar cases reported across the Gulf region. In the past 2 years, young models and influencers who had disappeared for brief periods, only to reappear later with unexplained injuries or deep psychological trauma, most of them too terrified to ever speak a word of what had happened to them. Maria was the exception. She was the one who had broken the silence. Despite receiving anonymous threats and under-the-table offers of substantial settlement money to forget the entire incident, she had courageously allowed her real name and her devastating story to be used as a weapon in the global fight against these predatory networks. Her testimony, fragmented and painful as it was, had provided investigators with their first crucial, concrete details about the methods, the locations, and the participants involved in this shadowy world. On her own phone, which she now kept carefully away from Maria's view to protect her fragile peace, Anna had saved messages from 3 of these other, silent victims. One message, from a girl in Belarus, read simply, "Thank you for fighting. I wasn't brave enough to tell my story, but seeing Maria be so strong gave me the courage to finally tell my family what happened to me in Dubai. You are saving lives." As night fell fully over Kiev, wrapping the city in a blanket of stillness, Maria, exhausted from the day's physiotherapy, finally fell into a fitful sleep with the help of the cocktail of medications that still regulated her painful days. Anna stepped out onto their small, unadorned balcony, looking up at the cold, bright stars scattered across the night sky, thinking about how drastically and irrevocably their lives had been altered in the span of a single year. The glamorous, aspirational photos that had once filled Maria's Instagram feed had been permanently replaced with a new, raw, and honest documentation of her grueling recovery journey. Her follower count had not dwindled, it had tripled. But these new followers weren't there for fashion tips or beauty secrets. They were there as a global community, invested in her fight, her survival, and her unvarnished truth. International media outlets continued to investigate the broader issue her case had so violently exposed. A hard-hitting BBC documentary titled The Dark Side of Dubai had featured Maria's story prominently, leading to parliamentary inquiries and official debates in several European countries about the need for better protections against trafficking networks that specifically target young models. Dubai authorities, under this mounting, sustained international pressure, had eventually established a special police task force to address crimes against foreign women visiting the emirate. Though they still officially and publicly maintained that Maria Kovalchuk's catastrophic injuries had resulted from a tragic accident, a fall from height, the full, unvarnished truth about what exactly happened to Maria Kovalchuk during those 10 missing days in Dubai might never be known with absolute, courtroom certainty. The men directly responsible, from the smooth-talking middlemen who recruited her to the powerful, predatory Sheikh who orchestrated the violence, were protected by a formidable fortress of wealth, influence, and the complex, often contradictory web of international jurisdictions that made genuine prosecution nearly impossible. But because of Maria's immense courage in speaking out, in refusing to be silenced, dozens of other young women had cancelled their upcoming Dubai bookings. Modeling agencies around the world, fearing liability and public backlash, had begun to implement new, stricter safety protocols for their talent, including mandatory daily check-ins with their home office, verified emergency contacts on file, and blacklists of promoters and scouts with questionable reputations. Social media influencers with large platforms began sharing detailed warning signs and personal safety tips with their millions of followers, creating a new wave of digital literacy and caution. In her own deeply painful way, Maria Kovalchuk had become more influential than she could have ever possibly imagined as Mary Lou. She had become a reluctant global symbol of survival and a powerful, persistent warning to an entire industry built upon beautiful facades that too often conceal the ugliest of truths. The perilously thin, often invisible line between a beautiful dream and a monstrous nightmare had been exposed for all the world to see, and though Maria Kovalchuk will carry the deep physical and emotional scars of crossing that line for the rest of her life, her story now serves as a lighthouse, its beam cutting through the fog of glamour, warning others away from the treacherous shores where immense wealth and unimaginable danger violently converge. For every young woman who sees Maria's story and decides to research an opportunity more carefully, for every aspiring model who now establishes a safety plan before traveling to a foreign country, for every worried parent who now asks more pointed, probing questions about their daughter's international bookings, Maria's immense suffering has not been in vain. The complete, forensic truth about what happened during those 10 missing days might remain forever buried beneath the desert sands of Dubai, guarded by secrets and silence. But Maria Kovalchuk's story, her sudden disappearance, her horrific suffering, and most importantly, her profound and resilient survival, will continue to echo across borders and through time, a sobering testament that will undoubtedly save countless others from having to endure the same nightmare she somehow survived. This is why we tell these stories, to give a voice to the voiceless and to fight for justice. If Maria's story impacted you, please share this video. You never know who it might protect. Subscribe for more investigations that uncover the truth, no matter how dark. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there.